I like that you know how much you can handle, so you should only act on what you can handle. Well, one of the things that I find so interesting is how much we want God to do certain things for us. Like we're looking to God to do things that we have the capacity to do ourselves. And actually, God is expecting us to operate and do ourselves for our own sake. And one of those things is actually humility. I think it's so interesting. I'm gonna share this scripture and then I'm gonna share a little bit of the experience. James 4:10, I believe, is where it's at, where he reads, "Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you." Humble yourself. So we kind of almost want God to do the humbling, but by the time God starts doing the humbling, it's pretty wild. It's crazy. It's painful. And a lot of things that can be avoided. Proverbs hints at that. Proverbs 22:3. The prudent sees danger ahead and avoids it, but the foolish ignores it and pays the penalty. Keeps going.
Yeah.
It pays the penalty. And so there's so much there, but a part of that is walking in your humility. And it's so interesting because I've prayed a prayer like this for quite some time now. Lord, keep me in your humility. And I think as of late, I've actually learned that how he's been doing that over time hasn't been him audibly speaking, hasn't been him putting me in awkward situations or anything of that sort. It's literally me. He's allowing me to see my own human tendencies and human heart. That a lot of that is what's being shown. And so it makes it harder for me to project onto others. It makes it more difficult for me to approach others in such a heinous or judgmental way because, man, as much as I think how you're navigating this positioning is wrong, I can see a little bit of me in you. So I am going to actually navigate this a lot differently because I would appreciate somebody coming to me with something like this with a lot of grace, with a lot
Yeah.
of grace and willingness to kind of guide me into understanding more so where you're coming from and have respectful dialogue. I think there's so much power in that. So that is one of many things in scripture that is often hinted to us, but humbling yourself is huge. So you can't walk around and think that you have the capacity to handle watching movies you shouldn't be, listening to music you shouldn't be. I don't think you should put yourself in those positions that ignite a lot of those emotions and feelings, horniness, igniting all of that for you to then go and take that other places and turn it into an entire functionality that is damaging in the end. And so you have to humble yourself, man. And it's really hard to humble yourself. One, when you don't put yourself in places of accountability where humility is granted, but it's also hard to humble yourself actively engaging in things that are louder. So it's clouding your judgment from hearing God. It's really hard. So you can't tell me that you're making an active effort to transition and to grow in that space. Not to say that you aren't struggling, because there's a difference. You can struggle and still be on the right path. That's very possible. But you can't tell me that you're in a struggle and you haven't put in applicable things that are going to keep you from engaging in certain activity that I think is really, really harmful for you in the end. And so humility is a huge part of that. And I think as we're navigating through this life with so many temptations that aren't sins. Okay, your temptation isn't the sin itself. It's your action towards it, your response towards it, how you navigate towards it that can actually turn it into a sin. So dealing with so many temptations, you got to be willing to just process it. You know what I mean? And a part of processing it is being humble and humbling yourself and recognizing your limitations, recognizing what you can and can't handle, and just being honest. So how humble are you? How willing are you? How much are you really willing to walk in humility, which isn't a sign of weakness, but as a strength? We're calling for people to have self-awareness, and people think that they can have self-awareness without humility. People think that it's okay for you to know, oh, I know I'm toxic. I'm toxic. I'm toxic this, I'm toxic that. There's no humility in that. You're admitting a terrible trait. Good for you. But you're walking around with great pride as if that's something to treasure and as if that's something that makes you appealing and attractive. And that's a struggle.
Yeah, so let's talk about two passages of scripture. You dug into Proverbs, so I think it's appropriate for us to jump into a little bit of Proverbs here, right? So Proverbs 6:27 asks us a question. It says, "Can a man take fire in his bosom and not be burned?" This to his point, right? And to the point that we were making, like you got to know what your capacity is. Some of us can be close to fire, recognize that as fire, and be like, I'm good. I got to make sure I keep some distance with that. That's hot. That's something that will cause me to go forward in this. And so, because the obvious answer to that question is no, you cannot take fire into, and you got to think about in your bosom. And that he's saying, can you bring it all close into here and not be burned? The wise man sees the fire, right? He sees the fire. The wise woman sees the fire and says, hey, this isn't something that I need to do. What proverb did you just quote that you said you're going to be using?
22:3. And then it's
22:3.
27:12 as well. It's repeated, so it's important.
It's repeated, right? The wise see danger ahead and avoid it, but a fool keeps going and gets into trouble. The wise see danger. So this is interesting. We see it. Now it's interesting. Wisdom is not something necessarily that you just have in your mind. Here, the scripture tells us that you can see. The wise see, right? So you anticipate this, you see this. And so I think it's important for us to know, just not to get ourselves in trouble. I told Grape some stories, y'all, that he just didn't know about me. And I was like, well, this brother probably, he don't want to talk to me no more after this. Here's the reality. I've been in that situation before. And so I think it's really important for you guys to understand that you have to use some wisdom. You have to use some wisdom. I was a very young man and I was in that situation. It was a bad situation. There was a lot that was on the line in that situation, including potentially going to jail and different things along those lines. You have to be able to use some wisdom in those moments. And the beautiful thing about something like this, about being in the Truth Project, is you get a chance to have that conversation. You get a chance to get confronted with that ahead of time. So when that potentially presents itself, you can see it, or you can avoid it altogether by saying, not a good look for me. I don't need to be a part of it. Now, I didn't have that surrounding me. So I realized too that I went through stuff to be able to share stuff like this back in this platform at this particular phase and stage of my life, right? To be able to share these things back with you. And so I think it's important when you're with people to know what you can and you cannot handle. I realized that my children were children, human beings rather, and that they had all the emotions and feelings and everything else that go with that. I simply set out a mandate, which was, hey, you're going to go out, you need to go out in a group. You need to go out and you need to stay out with the people in the same place. And you shouldn't be wandering off going anywhere, because you're opening the door for other things. And here's the deal. You guys know this if you've already done it. As soon as you cop that feel, all those emotions and everything else start to come with it. It's just that simple. And as soon as you do that, next thing you know, the other door opens. Now, remember, the scripture is very clear with us when it tells us that we're never tempted by God, that we're enticed away by our own lust. We're enticed by our own lust. And then it tells us that it conceives, right? And then it tells us that we carry it. Then it tells us that it gives a baby. And then it says it produces death in us. So interesting, right? So it's a process to get us there. But our problem is that when we're in the process, sometimes we will forget or not even forget, we will just simply neglect that there's an actual issue on the other side of this that could end up putting us in a really bad predicament, and that'll be a bad thing. So one of my daughters sent me this TikTok this afternoon, and it was this guy who said he got 7 baby mamas. This was his thing. Now it's satire, but he was making a point. He was like, I got 7 baby mamas, and he said, I don't want none of them. But he said, I told y'all I ain't taking care of none of them babies. He said, we both were irresponsible. He said, yeah, I could have pulled out. He's like, but I didn't. He goes, but you didn't push me off either. And so he's like, I ain't taking care of none of these babies. Now watch this. Listen to what he said after this. This part right here kind of really messed me up. He said, I'm not taking care of none of these babies, And he said, because he said, I told you in the first place that I didn't want to have any kids, and you slept with me anyway.
Mm.
Now, this wasn't a true story. He was making a point, but that's what he was saying. He was saying, I just want you to think you gave me your body with me telling you in the first place that I didn't want to have no babies. Who's at fault here? They both are. And that was his point. His point is that none of them were making a wise decision, but there was a consequence that was always potentially on the other end of their actions. This is something that we have to be careful about. But he was so dogmatic with saying, I'm not taking care of any of these. So it got a gazillion views because he went in, like people were like, is this real? Is this dude telling the truth? Because he was like, I ain't taking care, I ain't paying for nothing. I'm not buying diapers. I'm not doing it because I didn't ask for any of them. But his point was well taken. And so I just want to tell you that we have to be thinking along those lines. It's both people. And if we're believers, we should be guarding our hearts at all times over this situation so that we don't find ourselves in a place. Because I'm going to tell you what, you might think you have to pay child support, and she might be thinking, I'm going to get you for child support. But you know who pays the ultimate price in that? Is the child. Because the father, if he did not genuinely want to be there, he resents that whole thing. She resents him. And the kid is always the one that pays the biggest price. It's never the two people that are falling out and acting up with each other. It's always the child. And that's the consequence. We have to think further. We have to think deeper. We have to think more broader. We have to think more robust. We think too small sometimes, and we're just in a moment. I'm going to tell you, lust is like crack, y'all. Once it gets into your heart, once you get there, once you get a taste of it, man, there's no turning back from it. I'm just telling you, there is no turning back from it.
Hey, listen, if you stuck to the end of this from the bottom of my heart, thank you oh so much. If you want to hear more of these kinds of conversations in this format, please check the description below. There you will find a link to sign up for a Maverick membership. This is where the Truth Project sessions go down every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Central Time, where you can be a part of conversations just like the one I shared in this video. Your worldview is welcome, no matter what worldview you come from, and we're all there pursuing one goal: truth. Check the link in the description, sign up, 3 days for free. After that, it's $9.99 a month, but you'll get your money's worth and then some. I'll see you over there, and until next time, be easy and be breezy, my friend. Peace.